call it the Ajna Chakra. My phylactery at this point is a piece of metal that was... There were several different pieces of metal that I used in several different rituals for several different things, and I was taking a copy of the Book of the Law in Crowley's original handwriting and binding it up into a little box and placing it over my forehead to use as a source of authority during evocations. And over time, as these small metal objects, ring, earrings, kind of like pieces of jewelry that I used in different ceremonies for different purposes and had been with me for a long time, I started placing them in with the scripture. And after a certain amount of time, I found a friend who was a metal worker, and I got her to meld them all together for me. And now I use that to tie over my head instead of just the scripture itself. And I use my grandfather's shoelace to do it, because I have a connection there, obviously. Let's see. The altar, yes. The altar is the next one that I want to talk about. Crowley describes the kind of wood that should be used, the height of the altar that should be used. John Dee has a similar kind of thing in his work. It should, in many ways, the altar is meant to reflect the Ark of the Covenant. So that is the main consideration that one should have when bringing one's mind to what to use for this thing. Now, it's certainly permissible to use different objects or whatever. Honestly, my altar is not ideal for me right now. I've painted quite a bit of stuff on it, so it kind of helps me work like that, but it is just a bookshelf, essentially, a small bookshelf. The more effort and energy one puts into the altar is the better, because although it's not used directly in rituals so much, it's kind of more of a place to put things. It's a symbol of the magician's solid creative intent. It's a manifestation of the whole work of the magician to begin with, and whatever symbols and images are represented on the altar should reflect the magician's purpose at the time. I mean, the altar is something that you don't leave it the same way all the time. Certainly, you'll constantly be rearranging it as you're working on different things, trying to focus on different ideas and trying to focus on different forces. My old altar actually was a black triangular thing that a friend built for me. Just because I was tired of using the triangle as a triangle. I did principally evocations at the time. I didn't really do much else, so it just made sense to me to have a triangular altar that I could put whatever symbol that I was trying to deal with, and it was set up basically in the traditional way of as described in the Goetia with the Archangel Michael and so on and so forth. The table of practice is another thing which is similar to the altar, but different in the sense that it's kind of where the table of practice is almost like a microcosm that one uses to manipulate the objects in question. Ars Paulina, which is one of the books that Dee talks about and is included peripherally in a lot of grimoire kind of texts, but people in the occult community don't really talk about it too much. It's a very good book where essentially you have a table of practice, and that's meant to reflect the way that the ritual works. So you move planetary symbols around on the table as you are invoking the forces and so on and so forth. This is a really useful tool because it's a good way of, as a magician, when you're trying to influence causality, it's almost like you create the mini-universe and then you start like moving the pieces around the way that you want them to go, just like the metaphor of looking at traffic looking at traffic from the airplane. If you could just like move the cars, that's like your table basically, and you want it to represent everything that you're trying to bring into the ritual. It only plays in a few rituals. If you're doing invocations or evocations, you don't necessarily need the table in the same way. But it's something that I think that the magician would develop when they're trying to use the magical link to influence causality and to create to cause a certain effect. And that's a medium for expressing that creative intent. My table of practice was designed by my guardian angel. It was actually the sort of final point of my HGA working. It was expressed as, when I first started doing ceremonial magic, and I was working with the Asiatic archangels, I saw a vision of a truncated pyramid, which became very significant for many, many reasons. But anyway, the table of practice was set up to be a representation of a bird's eye view of a truncated pyramid with a sort of square in the middle and going out from there, and a circle in the middle of the square. So that was where I could put objects that I was trying to charge or consecrate or entities that I was trying to deal with. I'd place a black mirror over top if I was scrying into that area, and the 4 walls of the pyramid each have one of my magical oaths for the 4 grades leading up to the Dominus Limnis grade, which is the preparatory grade for Adeptus Minore, where you contact your Holy Guardian Angel. So each of those grades, the work of those grades, is expressed in the oath, which is placed on the 4 sides. So if I'm working on something which has more to do with what you would do during Zealotr work, for example, I would use that side of the table when I was working with it. If it was something that's more to do with practicus work, because in the outer order of the AA, you're taught all the basics of magic. Like you're not. I'm not going to say everything you're going to do later on will fall into one of those 4 categories, but most things that you're going to do will fall into one of the 4 categories of that. And that's specifically because I work with the AA. Other people will find their own ways of developing their own tables. And some grimoires, like Ars Paulina, a perfect example, says this is how the table has to be set up for this working, and then you do it like that. The lamp has the spirit idea. It's one of the ones that, again, people don't talk about much, because when Crowley describes it in part 2 of book 4, he says, it should be able to magically ignite itself, and it shouldn't have, should be able to burn without oil, and so on and so forth. And I think most of us have trouble doing that practically. Essentially, what we want for a lamp is a representation of, well, light is obvious, but if we have one source of light throughout the ritual, that can be useful. I will say, you can do a lot with candlelight. Sure, electric lights can be kind of jarring. You do kind of probably want to change the lighting when you are in a ritual ceremony, just because changing the lighting changes your mood always. I personally use colored lights quite a bit. I use different colors for different planets and so on and so forth. But for my lamp, which it doesn't actually provide any light, is the solar image that I have on my altar, and that's what I use as the representation of that. And some people might say that doesn't make any sense, and they might be right. I might be wrong. I don't know. The other thing is the crown, and that's the last one. I'm pretty sure. Oh no, there's a little bit more. The crown is one that, again, you're not going to find. It's not part of the 4 elements thing of like the wand, the disc, the cup, the dagger. So people don't talk about it as much. And certainly, finding a decent crown is not the easiest thing in the world. I essentially replaced that with my use of the phylactery. To me, that fills that role in my own magical work. But it is an important tool for a magician to have, because you are trying to establish authority. And it does sound like a lame, symbolic thing, and maybe it is, but still, it's useful to have that feeling. We all have the association that a crown is a certain form of authority. I think everyone can make that connection. So if we are trying to establish authority over the spirit world, it's not the worst thing in the world to maybe take a minute to say a prayer and put a crown on your head, because that will help you feel that authority and manifest that authority and use that authority creatively. Talismans are also important. And as I said before, I don't object to people buying those. I think the ones that we create are probably going to have more meaning. But if they go through enough with you, if you take them through enough, then that's key. And that doesn't just have to be like goetic symbols and stuff like that. It can be something that's personally significant to the magician. When I did my HGA operation, one of the things that I did constantly was I read my favorite book out loud to myself over and over, which is The Never-Ending Story, which and Michael Enda, which people probably aren't familiar with. It's actually practically a Gnostic fable. I mean, forget the movie. The movie's completely fucking retarded. I hate the movie. But in the book, it is really the story of a guy who gets sucked into a world, destroys the world, and recreates the world in his own image as a way of finding himself. Which they don't touch on in the movie at all. It is not about getting a dragon to beat up bullies, essentially. But I had a replica of Orin, which is actually from the movie. Unfortunately, the book has no bling, so I got a replica, which was a present from a very good friend of mine, and I used that and hung that around my neck. Which is, it's a little cheesy. It's kind of like it's from an '80s movie. It's from a kid's story, whatever. But I used that as a